in my room felt wrong that night, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to slip through the cracks of reality. At 7 years old, I was too young to name the dread that coiled in my chest, but old enough to know the shadows in our Suriname home weren't always just shadows. My name is Billy, a black Indian girl living with my parents, and at the time, my grandmother in a house that creaked with secrets. Our room, mine and my sister Tiffany's, was perched on the second floor, a small sanctuary with a bunk bed where I claimed the top. Tiffany, 14, and fearless, slept below her steady breathing, a rhythm I clung to when the world felt too quiet. But that night, silence wasn't comfort. It was a warning. The clock glowed 3 Hailuo a.m., its red numbers slicing through the dark like a blade. I woke without reason, my eyes darting to the window across from my bed. The balcony light outside bled through the thin curtain, casting a sickly yellow haze that outlined shapes in the night. I tried to sink back into sleep, to let the warmth of my blanket pull me under, but something held me there, alert, watching. My heart thudded a drum beat, urging me to look closer. And then I saw it, a small childlike hand pressed against the glass. Its fingers splayed like a spider's legs, motionless behind the curtain. It wasn't just there. It was waiting. Fear clamped my throat shut. I was a Christian schoolgirl taught to pray when the world didn't make sense. So I yanked the blanket over my head, curling into a ball. Lord, protect me. Make it go away. The words tumbled in my mind, frantic, as I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the image to dissolve. But it didn't. In my head, that hand lingered pale, too small, too still. Was it a child? A trick of the light? My mind raced, conjuring stories I'd overheard from elders about things that weren't human things, that wore familiar shapes to deceive. I didn't dare look again. The curtain's faint glow felt like a barrier, fragile as paper between me and whatever was out there. I lay there for hours, or maybe minutes, time warped under the weight of terror. The house was silent, but not the kind of silence that soothes. It was heavy, like the air before a storm, thick with the sense that something was aware of me. I thought of Tiffany, sleeping soundly below, oblivious to the thing at our window. I wanted to call her name, to shake her awake, but my voice was trapped, my body frozen. What if it hears me? What if it moves? The thought of that hand shifting, tapping, or God forbid, reaching through the glass, kept me pinned to the mattress. As a child, I'd always noticed things others didn't. Flickers in corners, whispers in empty rooms, My parents called it imagination, but this was different. This was real. The hand wasn't just a shape. It carried intent, a quiet malice that pressed against my skin like cold fingers. I prayed harder, my lips moving soundlessly, begging for dawn. Eventually, exhaustion won, pulling me into a fitful sleep where dreams twisted into nightmares of tiny hands crawling across my bed. Morning came, and sunlight poured through the curtain, washing away the night's terror. I sat up, my eyes locked on the window. The curtain hung still, innocent, revealing nothing. No smudges, no marks, no proof. But I knew what I'd seen. The second floor made it impossible. There was no balcony, no ledge, just a sheer drop to the ground below. No child could have stood there, pressing their hand to the glass. Yet the image burned in my mind, sharp and undeniable. I didn't tell Tiffany. She'd laugh, call me a baby. I didn't tell my parents. Either they'd say it was a dream, like they always did. But the fear stayed a seed planted deep, waiting to grow. That day, I moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding the window, jumping at every shadow. The normalcy of breakfast, my mother's chatter, Tiffany's teasing, it all felt wrong, like a mask over something darker. I kept glancing upstairs, toward our room, dreading the night to come. What if it returned? What if it wasn't just a hand next time? The questions gnawed at me, and by evening, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I needed someone to believe me, someone who wouldn't laugh. That's when I turned to my grandmother, the one person who always listened, whose eyes held stories she never told. The darkness had teeth that night, and they sank into me the moment I climbed into bed. I'd spent the day haunted, replaying that small, pale hand in my mind, until it felt like a brand on my soul. The second floor of our Suriname home, once a place of comfort, now felt like a trap. Tiffany was already asleep below me, her soft snores a cruel reminder of how alone I was in my fear. I clutched my blanket, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, refusing to look at the window. But the pull was there, magnetic, demanding. I face it. I didn't want to. I didn't want to know if it was back. But the silence was too loud, too alive, and I couldn't resist. I glanced at the clock, 3:00 a.m. again, as if time itself was mocking me. The balcony light filtered through the curtain, casting that same sickly glow across the room. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm that drowned out everything else. Slowly, reluctantly, I turned my head toward the window. And there it was, the hand, small, childlike, pressed flat against the glass, its fingers spread wide, unmoving. No arm, no shadow, just that hand floating in the dark, like it had been severed from reality itself. My breath caught a sharp pain in my chest. It's real. It's back, I whispered Tiffany. My voice was a trembling thread, barely audible. Tiffany, wake up. But she didn't stir. Her snores continued steady, oblivious. I wanted to scream, to climb down and shake her, but my body wouldn't move. The hand held me captive, its presence a weight that pinned me to the bed. It wasn't just a hand anymore. It was a promise, a threat, a thing that knew I was watching. My mind screamed questions. What did it want? Why me? Why now? The Christian school hymns I'd memorized felt useless against this, like trying to hold back a flood with a paper wall. I pulled the blanket over my head, my safe haven from the night before, but it felt thinner, now flimsy. Lord, please take it away. Protect me. The prayer was desperate, a lifeline thrown into the void. But the hand's image lingered behind my closed eyes, its pale fingers etched into my vision. I imagined it moving, peeling back the curtain, pressing harder until the glass cracked. The thought sent a shiver through me, cold and sharp, like stepping into a frozen river. I couldn't shake the sense that it was waiting for me to make a mistake, to look too long, to invite it closer. The night stretched on endless. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside became the hand's accomplice. I pictured it sliding across the glass, searching for a way in. My grandmother's stories, half heard and half remembered, crept into my mind, tales of spirits that lingered in the jungle of creatures that mimicked children to lure the unwary. Was this one of them? A bakru, maybe, with its childlike form and malevolent heart? I didn't know, but the name felt right heavy with meaning I couldn't yet grasp. I don't know when I fell asleep. Maybe fear burned itself out, or maybe my prayers worked, if only for a moment. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the curtain, warm and golden, chasing away the night's chill. The window was empty, the curtain still. I climbed down from the bunk, my legs shaky, and checked the glass. Nothing. No marks. No smudges. Just clean glass, mocking my fear. Tiffany was already up, humming in the bathroom, unaware of the terror that had gripped me. I wanted to tell her, to make her see, but the words wouldn't come. She'd never believe me. No one would. Except maybe one person. The house felt alive that evening, its walls whispering secrets only my grandmother seemed to hear. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. The hand, the fear, the way the night had turned against me. Tiffany was downstairs, laughing with my parents, their voices a distant hum that only deepened my isolation. I slipped away, climbing the stairs to the upstairs living room where my grandmother spent her evenings. She was there, sitting in her worn armchair, her eyes sharp, despite the lines etched into her face. She was my safe harbor, the one who never dismissed my stories as childish nonsense. I needed her now. Grandma. I started my voice small. Something's wrong. She looked up, her gaze piercing, and gestured for me to sit. The words spilled out, halting at first, then rushing like a river breaking a dam. I told her about the hand, how it appeared at 3:00 a.m., how it pressed against the window with no body behind it. I described the fear, the way it clawed at my chest, the way Tiffany slept through it all. Her expression shifted as I spoke from curiosity to something deeper, something that made my stomach twist. She believed me. I could see it in her eyes, in the way her hands tightened around the arms of her chair. "Billy," she said softly, her voice steady but heavy. "You've seen something that doesn't belong here." She didn't laugh, didn't call it a dream. Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, worn Bible, its pages yellowed and soft from years of use. "Keep this under your pillow," she said, pressing it into my hands. "And pray. Always pray." Her words weren't just advice. They were a command, a shield. I clutched the Bible, its weight grounding me, promising protection. She didn't say what she thought it was, but her silence spoke louder than words. She knew things, stories, from the old country, from the jungle that she'd never shared with me. I wanted to ask more, to beg her to explain, but fear held me back. What if knowing made it worse? What if naming it gave it power? I thanked her, my voice barely a whisper, and retreated to our room. The Bible felt warm in my hands, a talisman against the dark. I didn't tell my parents. I knew they'd laugh, call it a nightmare, tell me to grow up. But Grandma's belief was enough. It had to be. That night, I climbed into bed with the Bible tucked under my pillow, its edges pressing into my cheek as I lay down. Tiffany was already asleep. Her presence a small comfort, but not enough to erase the dread. I stared at the ceiling, avoiding the window, praying the Bible would work. The clock ticked closer to 3:00 a.m. Each second a step toward the unknown. I waited breathless for the hand to appear, for the curtain to glow with that sickly light. But the night stayed quiet. No hand, no shadow, just the soft hum of the house and Tiffany's breathing below. For the first time in days, I slept dreamless and whole. Years later, the hand still haunts me, a ghost that never fully leaves. Growing up in Suriname, I learned the stories my grandmother never told me as a child. Tales of the Bakru, small creatures with childlike forms, but eyes that burned with something ancient. They weren't children. They were deceivers, spirits that lingered in the shadows, drawn to fear, to innocence, to those who saw what others couldn't. The hand I saw matched their description too perfectly. The small fingers, the unnatural stillness, the way it seemed to watch me. I don't know why it came, why it chose me, but I know it wasn't the last time I felt the paranormal brush against my life. That night, with the Bible under my pillow, marked a turning point, but not an end. The hand never returned, but the fear did in different forms, shadows that moved too slowly, whispers in empty rooms, dreams that felt too real. My grandmother's gift. Her belief gave me strength, but it also opened my eyes to a world where the line between real and unreal was thin as a blade. I carry her Bible still not under my pillow, but in my heart, a reminder that some things can't be explained, only endured. It was a humid evening in 2010, the kind where the air clung to your skin like a second shadow, heavy and inescapable. My name is Carol, and I was 14 years old, living in a quiet apartment complex called Quests Avenue, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city. The complex was a maze of 5 concrete buildings, each one looming like a silent sentinel, their faded paint peeling under the relentless sun. I lived in Building B, first floor, where the hum of ceiling fans and the chatter of neighbors filled the days. Across from my building stood Building D, where I attended tuition classes every evening, a routine as predictable as the sunset. The walk between the buildings was a 20-minute ritual, my sneakers scuffing against cracked pavement, my mind drifting through daydreams or the occasional gossip with friends. Quests Avenue wasn't the kind of place where things happened. It was ordinary, almost suffocatingly so. The buildings were arranged in a loose semicircle, their windows staring blankly at one another, reflecting the monotony of life here. Mothers called their kids in for dinner. Old men played cards on rickety tables, and stray cats slunk through the alleys. But there was one detail that always stood out. A detail I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I tried. Beside Building D was a small, rusted security door, its paint chipped and faded, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. It was always locked, its purpose a mystery. No one ever used it. Not the guards, not the residents, not even the maintenance crew. It was just there, a forgotten relic, blending into the shadows of the building's brick wall. I'd pass by that door every day on my way to class, my eyes lingering on its weathered surface. Sometimes I'd wonder what was behind it. A storage room, a maintenance closet, or maybe nothing at all. Just a void. The thought made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. After all, it was just a door. My routine was simple. Leave home at 4:30 p.m. Sit through an hour of math or literature, and head back by 6:30 p.m., usually with a friend or two. We'd laugh, share snacks, and let the world fade into the background. That evening, though, something felt different. The air was thicker, the shadows longer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting just out of sight. As I walked to class that day, my backpack slung over one shoulder, I glanced at the security door. Its rusted hinges seemed to groan under an invisible weight, and for a moment, I thought I saw the handle twitch. I blinked, and it was still. Just my imagination, I told myself, quickening my pace. But the unease lingered, a cold knot in my stomach that refused to unravel. In class, I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to that door. Why did it bother me so much? Why did it feel like it was calling me, daring me to notice it? By the time class ended, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple. My friend Sarah walked out with me, her laughter cutting through the evening stillness. She offered me a bag of chips, and we stood outside, Building D, munching and joking about our teacher's terrible handwriting. Feel the weight of that moment, Carol. You didn't know it yet, but something was about to change. The world felt normal, then safe in its predictability. But as Sarah waved goodbye and headed to her next class, I was alone. The complex was quiet now, the usual hum of life replaced by an oppressive silence. I started my walk home, the bag of chips crinkling in my hand. The path was familiar, past the benches, where old men smoked, past the flickering street lamp that buzzed like a dying insect. But as I passed the security door, I froze. Look closer, Carol. You can't ignore it now. The door was ajar, just a sliver, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. My heart stuttered. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the pavement. And then I heard it, a faint creak, like the door was exhaling. I forced myself to move my sneakers, pounding against the ground as I hurried away. But the image of that door cracked open, like a wound burned into my mind. It wasn't supposed to be open. It was never open. I told myself it was nothing, just a maintenance worker or a guard who'd forgotten to lock it. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong with Quest's Avenue that night. Something that made the air taste bitter, like metal. I clutched my backpack tighter, my fingers trembling as I fumbled with the last few chips. The complex, once so familiar, now felt like a labyrinth, its shadows twisting into shapes that didn't belong. I didn't dare look back at the door. Not yet. But I could feel it like a pair of eyes boring into my back, watching, waiting. The security door wasn't just a door, it was a presence. It crouched in the shadow of Building D, its rusted surface swallowing the light like a black hole. Every day, I'd walk past it, my eyes darting to its chipped paint, its dented handle, its aura of neglect. It was the kind of thing you'd overlook unless you were looking for it, and even then, it seemed to resist being noticed. No one talked about it. Not my neighbors, not the guards who patrolled the complex with their lazy strides. Not even the kids who'd dare each other to touch its cold metal surface. It was as if the door existed in a blind spot, a piece of the world everyone had agreed to ignore. But I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. That evening, as I stood outside Building D with Sarah, the door was there, lurking in my peripheral vision. I tried to focus on her voice, on the salty crunch of the chips, on the normalcy of our conversation. But the door was like a splinter in my mind, sharp and persistent. I'd never seen it open, not in the 2 years I'd lived at Quest's Avenue. It was always locked, its purpose, a mystery that no one cared to solve. Sometimes I'd imagine what was behind it, a dusty storage room filled with forgotten junk, or maybe a staircase leading to nowhere. But those were daytime thoughts, safe and rational. At night, under the weight of the dark, my imagination turned sinister. What if the door led to something else? Something that wasn't supposed to be there. Stop, Carol. Don't let your mind wander. Just walk home. But as Sarah left, and I started my journey back to Building B, the door called to me. Its presence was heavier now, like a hand pressing against my chest. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the path ahead, but my body betrayed me. My steps slowed, my head turned, and there it was, the door slightly ajar. The gap was small, just enough to reveal a sliver of blackness, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. The air around it seemed to hum a low vibration that I felt in my bones. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light, but my body screamed otherwise. My palms were slick with sweat, my breath shallow. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Not yet. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door. The complex was silent, unnaturally so. No neighbors chatting, no kids playing, no stray cats yowling in the distance. Just Mia and the door. Step closer. Carol, you want to know, don't you? The thought wasn't mine, but it slithered into my mind, smooth and insidious. I shook my head, trying to dislodge it, but it clung to me like damp cloth. I took a step back, my sneakers scraping against the pavement. The door didn't move, but it felt alive, watching me with an intelligence I couldn't comprehend. I turned away, my heart pounding, and started walking again, faster this time. The chips in my hand were forgotten, the bag crushed in my fist. I just needed to get home to the safety of my apartment, where the lights were bright and my parents were waiting. But the door wasn't done with me. As I moved, I heard it a faint, deliberate creak, like the sound of something waking up. My stomach dropped. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but I could feel it, the weight of that open door, the pull of whatever lay beyond it. The path to Building B stretched endlessly before me, the familiar benches and street lamps, now alien and threatening. Every shadow seemed to pulse, every sound amplified. The hum the street lamp was a growl, the rustle of leaves a whisper. I was alone, but I wasn't. Something was there, just out of sight, matching my steps. I clutched my backpack, my nails digging into the straps. Keep walking, Carol. Don't stop. Don't look. But the door's presence was inescapable. A dark anchor dragging me back. He came from the door. Carol, you saw him, didn't you? The moment I heard the creak, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I was halfway to Building B, the crushed bag of chips still in my hand. When I saw him, he emerged from the security door like a shadow, peeling itself from the wall, tall and gaunt, his limbs moving in a way that made my skin crawl. His walk was wrong, jerky, like a marionette with half its strings cut. Each step was a struggle, as if his body wasn't his own. He kept his head down, his eyes fixed on his feet, as if he was ashamed of how he moved. But then he looked up, and our eyes met. His face was a nightmare. His eyes were too wide apart, like they'd been stretched across his skull, and his jaw hung at an unnatural angle, misaligned and crooked. It wasn't just his appearance, it was the way he felt. Wrong, like he didn't belong in this world. His gaze locked onto mine, and I felt it, a cold, invasive force that reached into my chest and squeezed. I tried to look away to focus on the path, but his eyes held me. They were empty, yet full of something I couldn't name. Hunger, maybe, or something worse. I fumbled with the chips, shoving them into my pocket, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped them. "Run, Carol, run now." But my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, trapped in his stare. He started moving toward me, his jerky walk turning into something more purposeful, more predatory. Each step was deliberate, his long limbs twitching as if fighting against some invisible restraint. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, my voice gone. The complex was still silent, the air thick with the weight of his presence. The benches, the street lamps, the buildings, they all seemed to fade, leaving just me and him. He was closer now, close enough for me to see the way his lips twitched, curling into a grin that wasn't human. It was too wide, too sharp, too full of malice. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would burst. "You can't stay here, Carol. Move." I forced myself to walk my steps, uneven, my backpack bouncing against my back. He matched my pace, his movements eerily synchronized with mine. I could hear his footsteps now, not the steady rhythm of a normal walk, but a halting, scraping sound, like he was dragging something heavy. I didn't dare look back. I focused on the path, on the distant glow of building B's lights. But the distance seemed to stretch, the building retreating with every step. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I could feel him behind me, his presence a physical weight pressing against my spine. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, my hands shaking as I clutched my backpack straps. And then he was there, right behind me. I felt it before I heard it, a tug on my backpack, so sudden and violent, it nearly yanked me off my feet. I spun around my heart, a wild animal in my chest, and there he was. Up close, he was worse. His eyes bulged unblinking, their pupils too small, like pinpricks in a sea of white. His jaw seemed to shift, clicking, as if it wasn't properly attached, and that grin, it stretched wider, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too uneven. Don't look, Carol. Don't let him see your fear. But I couldn't look away. I was trapped, drowning in the wrongness of him. "Do you have any money in your bag?" His voice was a low, guttural rasp, like gravel dragged across glass. It wasn't just the sound. It was the way it crawled into my ears, slithering down my spine and settling in my bones. I stammered, No, I don't. My voice barely a whisper, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly hold on to my backpack. He didn't blink. His eyes, those horrible too wide eyes, bore into me cold and unyielding. The air around us felt wrong, like it was vibrating with something unnatural. The complex was still silent, but now I noticed the benches nearby, where a few people sat, their faces etched with concern. Their presence broke the spell, just for a moment, and I clung to it like a lifeline. He laughed, but it wasn't a laugh. It was a hollow, mocking sound, like a machine trying to mimic joy. "Why are you so scared?" he asked, his voice dripping with something dark, something that made my skin prickle. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My body acted before my mind could catch up, yanking my backpack from his grip with a strength I didn't know I had. And then I ran. My sneakers pounded against the pavement, each step a desperate plea for escape. I didn't look back, but I could feel him, his presence lingering like a stain. The lights of Building B grew closer, their warm glow a beacon in the darkness. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed, until I reached my front door and fumbled with the keys. Inside, I collapsed against the door, my breath ragged, my heart still racing. My parents were in the living room, their voices a distant hum. I stumbled toward them, the words spilling out in a frantic rush. I told them everything. The door, the man, his face, his voice. Their faces shifted from confusion to horror, their eyes wide as they listened. "If you ever see him again, call us immediately," my dad said, his voice firm but shaking. My mom pulled me into a hug, her arms a fragile shield against the terror still clawing at me. They promised to report him to keep me safe, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't understand. They hadn't seen him. That night, I lay in bed, the covers pulled up to my chin, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. The image of his face was burned into my mind, those eyes, that jaw, that grin. I tried to convince myself it was over, that he was gone, but the memory of his voice echoed in my head. "Why are you so scared? I didn't sleep." Every creak of the apartment, every rustle outside, sent my heart racing. I kept my phone close, my parents' number on speed dial, but it didn't help. The darkness outside my window felt alive, watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. Days passed, but the memory of that night didn't fade. Quest's Avenue was the same buildings, same benches, same flickering street lamps, but it felt different now, tainted. I avoided the path by Building D, taking longer routes to class, my eyes scanning every shadow. every corner. The security door was closed again, locked tight, as if it had never been opened. But I didn't trust it. I could still feel its pull, its silent promise of something waiting just beyond. My friends noticed the change in me, my quietness, my jumpiness, but I didn't tell them everything. How could I? How could I explain the way that man's face had twisted? My reality made me question what was real. A few days later, Sarah pulled me aside after class. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something close to fear. "I saw him," she whispered. "The man you described." She'd been walking home, passing the security door, when she saw him stumble out his movements, just as jerky, his face just as wrong. She said he looked at her, his eyes locking onto hers, and then he turned and staggered back to the door, disappearing inside. His face was so pale, she said, her voice trembling, like he wasn't alive. I felt a chill run through me, the same cold I'd felt that night. She thought he might have been drunk, citing the liquor shops nearby, but I knew better. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't anything I could explain. I never saw him again, but that didn't matter. He was still there, in the corners of my mind, in the shadows of Quest's Avenue. Every time I passed that door, I felt him, his presence lingering like a bad dream. I started avoiding it altogether, taking the long way around the complex. But it didn't help. The door was always there waiting. My parents kept a closer eye on me. Their worry, a constant weight, but they couldn't protect me from the fear that had taken root. It wasn't just the man. It was what he represented, the crack in the world that had opened that night, showing me something I wasn't supposed to see. What was he? Carol? You'll never know, but you'll always wonder. To this day, I can't walk past a locked door without feeling that same cold knot in my stomach. The image of his face, those eyes that grin, it's a scar that won't fade. Quest's Avenue is long behind me, but the memory of that night is a shadow. I carry a reminder that some things don't belong in the light. I was only 4 days into our family trip when something shifted, something I couldn't name, but could feel like eyes boring into my back. I stepped off the bus, my sneakers crunching against the gravel, heart still buzzing from the long ride. Mexico was new to me, its vibrant chaos, a stark contrast to the orderly streets back home. My siblings, my older sister, my younger sister, and my brother, trailed behind their chatter, blending with the hum of cicadas. We were here to visit family, to reconnect with roots we barely understood. The town of San Pedro sprawled before us, its central park glowing under the late afternoon sun, framed by mountains that loomed like silent sentinels. Our step-grandmother's family owned a small restaurant across from the park, its faded sign swaying gently in the breeze. The place felt alive with laughter spilling from open windows and the clatter of plates echoing inside. My grandpa, a man of few words, but warm smiles, greeted us with hugs that smelled of tobacco and old leather. I remember standing there, taking it all in, the vibrant murals on the walls, the chatter of locals, the distant bark of a dog. It was picturesque, almost too perfect, like a postcard hiding something darker beneath its gloss. My younger sister tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide with excitement, pointing at the park's volleyball nets. "Can we play?" she asked, her voice bright with innocence. I nodded, unaware that this moment of joy would soon unravel into something far more sinister. Grandpa agreed to let us explore, so we wandered toward the park, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the grass. The park was alive with families, kids chasing balls, and vendors hawking snacks. We bought a volleyball, its bright colors a stark contrast to the unease beginning to coil in my gut. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us, their gaze heavy like a weight pressing against my skin. I scanned the crowd, but no one stood out, just faces lost in their own worlds. My older sister laughed, tossing the ball to me, and for a moment, I let myself forget the unease, let the warmth of the moment pull me in. But then I saw him, not clearly, not yet, just a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. A man sitting on a bench, too still, too focused. His silhouette blurred against the crowd, but his presence felt sharp, like a blade cutting through the noise. I shook it off, blaming the heat, the jet lag, anything but the truth. We played for hours, the volleyball, bouncing between us, the net trembling with each hit. My little sister giggled her ponytail, swinging as she dove for the ball. My brother, always the serious one, kept score, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was perfect until it wasn't. As the sun sank lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, my younger sister froze mid-step. Her face paled, her eyes locked on something beyond the net. "He's watching us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chatter of the park. I followed her gaze, and there he was, the man from the bench. He hadn't moved, but his eyes were fixed on us, unblinking, like a predator sizing up its prey. His posture was wrong, too stiff, too deliberate. I tried to laugh it off, to tell her it was nothing but the words caught in my throat. Something about him felt off, like he didn't belong in this world of laughter and light. We kept playing, but the joy had drained from the game. Every time I glanced at the bench, he was there, unmoving his gaze, a constant pressure. My brother noticed it too, his jaw tightening, but he didn't say anything. Not yet. The park began to empty as families drifted home, the air growing cooler, the shadows deeper. I wanted to leave, to pull my siblings back to the safety of the restaurant, but my little sister begged for one more game. I gave in, ignoring the growing knot in my stomach. That was my first mistake. The man stood up, slowly, deliberately, his movements jerky, like a puppet on frayed strings. He didn't walk toward us. Not yet, but his presence was a warning, a signal that the night was about to change. I gripped the volleyball tighter, my knuckles whitening. The park, once vibrant, now felt like a stage, and we were the unwitting actors in a play we didn't understand. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just a stranger, but deep down, I knew better. Something about him wasn't human, not entirely. And as the last rays of sunlight vanished, I realized we were no longer in control. The restaurant's lights glowed in the distance, a beacon of safety we hadn't yet reached. My siblings laughed, oblivious to the shift in the air, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being hunted. The man's silhouette lingered in my mind, a shadow that refused to fade. I didn't know it then, but that night in San Pedro would mark us, would carve itself into our memories with a precision that only fear can achieve. We were about to learn just how fragile safety can be. The bench was empty now, but the weight of his gaze lingered a ghost that clung to the edges of my vision. The volleyball court was surrounded by a tall net designed to keep the ball from flying into the street, but it did little to ease the growing dread in my chest. My younger sister's laughter had faded, replaced by a nervous energy as she glanced over her shoulder. The man was gone, but his absence felt more threatening than his presence. I scanned the park, the fading light casting long, distorted shadows across the grass. Every rustle of leaves, every distant shout made my heart lurch. We were introduced to our step-cousin Rose just as the game ended. She was all smiles, her energy infectious, her dark hair bouncing as she gestured toward the court. "Come on, I'll show you the best spots in town," she said, her voice warm, but tinged with something I couldn't place. Maybe excitement, maybe urgency. We followed her, the volleyball tucked under my arm, my siblings trailing behind. The park was quieter now, the families gone, leaving only a few stragglers and the hum of crickets. Rose led us to the court, pointing out the nets, the worn patches of dirt where countless games had been played. She was easy to like her stories of San Pedro, filling the air with a sense of adventure. But my little sister wasn't listening. She tugged at my sleeve again, her voice small. "He was waving at me," she said, her eyes darting toward the bench where the man had been. I froze my breath, catching. Who, I asked, though I already knew. She pointed her finger, trembling, to the empty bench. The guy, he was sitting there, waving. My older sister laughed, brushing it off as a kid's imagination. But my brother's silence told me he'd seen something too. I looked at the bench now, bathed in the dim glow of a street lamp, and felt a chill crawl up my spine. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on us, suffocating the warmth of the evening. We started another game, but the rhythm was off. My throws were too hard, my sister's catches sloppy. Rose noticed her brow furrowing. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer now. I nodded, but my eyes kept drifting to the edges of the court, where the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The man hadn't returned, but his presence lingered a stain on the night. I tried to focus on the game, on the sound of the ball hitting the net, but every movement felt watched, every laugh forced. My little sister's eyes were wide, her movements jerky, like she was waiting for something to happen. Then I saw him again, not on the bench, but closer, standing just outside the net, his silhouette barely visible in the growing dark. He wasn't moving, just standing there, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. My heart pounded a drumbeat in my chest, urging me to run, to scream, to do something. But I didn't. I couldn't. My siblings were still playing oblivious, and Rose was telling a story about climbing the mountains. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that he was just a local, maybe drunk, maybe lost. But his stillness was wrong. His presence, a violation of the safety we'd taken for granted. "Time to go," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. My siblings looked at me confused, but Rose nodded, sensing the shift. We gathered our things, the volleyball suddenly feeling like a burden. As we left the court, I glanced back, and he was gone again, swallowed by the night. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. The park felt different now, its beauty tainted by the knowledge that something was out there, watching, waiting. We walked back toward the restaurant, Rose leading the way, her chatter a thin shield against the fear creeping into my bones. The street lamps flickered as we passed their light, casting fleeting glimpses of the world around us. I kept my siblings close my hand on my little sister's shoulder, her warmth grounding me. But the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It grew stronger, more insistent, like a whisper in the back of my mind, urging me to look back. I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. The restaurant's lights were closer now, a promise of safety. But the night was far from over. Something was coming. Something we weren't prepared for, and I could feel it in the way the air seemed to hum with menace. The mountains loomed over San Pedro, their jagged peaks cutting into the starless sky like teeth waiting to bite. Rose led us up a small hill behind the restaurant, her voice bright as she pointed out the peaks she'd climbed. "You can see the whole town from up there," she said, her words painting a picture of adventure I wanted to believe in. But my little sister's hand was cold in mine, her steps hesitant, and my brother's silence was louder than any words. The joy of the evening had evaporated, replaced by a tension that clung to us like damp cloth. The second park was smaller, tucked away behind the restaurant, its grass patchy and worn. A single swing creaked in the breeze, its chains rattling like a warning. Rose sat on the grass, gesturing for us to join her. But my brother stayed standing, his eyes scanning the darkness. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. The air here was different, thicker, laced with the scent of earth and something metallic, like blood. My little sister clung to me, her earlier excitement replaced by a quiet fear that mirrored my own. We sat in a loose circle, Rose's stories filling the silence, but they felt hollow now, like a distraction from the truth. My little sister's voice cut through small and trembling. "Did you see him too?" she asked, her eyes darting to the shadows at the edge of the park. My heart stopped. "The guy from the volleyball court," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He was waving at me. My older sister rolled her eyes, but the laugh she forced was brittle, unconvincing. Rose's smile faltered, her gaze flicking to the darkness. "What guy?" she asked, her tone sharp. Before I could answer, he appeared. Not a sound, not a warning. Just there at the far end of the park, his silhouette a stain against the night. He sat on a bench, his posture too still, too deliberate, like a statue come to life. My breath caught my body, frozen, as his head turned his eyes, finding us in the dark. They weren't eyes, not really just voids, black and endless, pulling me in. My little sister whimpered, pressing closer, and my brother stepped forward, his fists clenched. Rose stood, her voice steady but tight. "Let's move." She said her words a command we didn't question. We shifted to the opposite end of the park, our steps quick, our voices hushed. But he followed. Slowly, at first, his movements jerky, like a machine struggling to function. Then, faster, his strides long and predatory, closing the distance. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm that drowned out everything else. Rose's eyes met mine, wide with fear, and she whispered, "Run." We didn't hesitate. We sprinted the grass slick under our feet, the air burning in our lungs. My little sister stumbled, and I pulled her along, her hand slippery with sweat. The park blurred around us, the swings creak, fading into the sound of our ragged breaths. We ran left toward the restaurant, toward safety. He ran right, his silhouette vanishing into the shadows. For a moment, I thought we'd lost him, that it was over. I laughed, a shaky, desperate sound, trying to convince myself it was nothing. My older sister joined in her laughter, forced, but my little sister was shaking her eyes, brimming with tears. My brother was silent, his gaze fixed on the path we'd taken. "He's gone," I said more to myself than to her, but the words felt like a lie. The night was too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. We stood there, catching our breath. The restaurant's lights, a distant promise. Rose was pale, her usual confidence shaken. "I've never seen him before," she said, her voice trembling. "Nothing like this has ever happened." I wanted to believe her, to believe we were safe, but the air was thick with menace, a warning that the night wasn't done with us. The mountains watched silent and unyielding, their shadows stretching toward us like claws. We weren't alone, not anymore, and the realization settled in my bones like ice. The street was too quiet, the silence a scream in itself, as if the town knew what was coming. We turned toward the restaurant. Our steps hurried, the gravel crunching underfoot like bones snapping. My little sister clung to me, her breath hitching, her eyes darting to every shadow. Rose led the way, her earlier warmth replaced by a grim determination, her flashlight cutting through the dark. My brother stayed close, his silence a wall of strength, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed, as if ready for a fight. The restaurant was close, its lights a beacon, but the distance felt infinite, each step pulling us deeper into a nightmare. Then my little sister screamed. The sound tore through the night, sharp and raw, stopping us in our tracks. "He's right there," she cried, pointing toward a fence at the edge of the street. My blood ran cold. There he was, the man from the park, his silhouette unmistakable. He wasn't walking. Now he was running his movements wild, erratic, like something unleashed. He vaulted over the fence with unnatural ease, his body twisting in ways that made my stomach churn. His eyes locked on us, those black voids burning with intent, and he charged his footsteps, a thunderous drumbeat against the earth. Rose grabbed my little sister's hand, pulling her toward the restaurant. "Go," she shouted, her voice cracking with fear. My older sister ran, her breath coming in gasps, but I froze, my legs rooted to the ground. My brother stepped forward, his body a shield between us and the man. "Run," he said, his voice low, steady, but I could hear the strain beneath it. I grabbed my older sister's hand, pulling her with me, but my eyes were locked on the man on the way. His limbs moved too fast, too wrong, like something pretending to be human. We sprinted, the restaurant's lights growing closer, but the man was faster. His footsteps echoed behind us, a relentless rhythm that drowned out my heartbeat. My little sister was sobbing, now her cries cutting through the night like a blade. I risked a glance back, and he was there, closer than I'd thought, his twisted grin a slash of white in the dark. His bag swung from his shoulder, heavy, ominous, its contents a mystery that fueled my terror. What was in it? A weapon. Something worse. The question burned in my mind, a fire that refused to die. My brother stopped, turning to face him, his voice steady, but laced with anger. "I don't want any problems," he said, his words a challenge. The man slowed, his grin widening, but he didn't speak. He just stared, his eyes boring into us, unblinking, unyielding. I pulled my sisters toward the restaurant, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Rose was ahead, her flashlight swinging wildly, illuminating glimpses of the man's face. Pale, too pale, his features sharp and wrong, like a mask stretched over something not human. We reached the restaurant, bursting through the door, the warmth and light, a stark contrast to the terror outside. My little sister collapsed into my arms, her body shaking, her tears soaking my shirt. Rose was pale, her hands trembling as she locked the door behind us. Our family rushed over, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. What happened? My step-grandmother asked, her voice sharp with worry. Rose tried to explain her words, stumbling over each other, but my little sister's sobs drowned her out. My brother came in last, his face a mask of calm, but his eyes were dark with anger. "He's gone," he said, but his voice was tight, like he didn't believe it. Rose's cousin, who'd gone out to check, returned with news that made my blood run cold. The man had been yelling, claiming he lived nearby, but Rose's cousin knew better. "He doesn't live here," he said. "His house is miles away." The man had torn a branch from a tree, screaming, his eyes locked on us, even as he fled into the night. The restaurant felt safe, but the safety was a lie. The man was still out there, his bag a question mark that haunted me. I held my little sister, whispering that she was safe, but the words felt hollow. The night had marked us, its claws sinking deep, and I knew we'd never forget the man who'd chased us. The man who wasn't entirely a man. The restaurant's lights were too bright, casting harsh shadows that seemed to mock our fear. We sat huddled together, the warmth of the room doing little to thaw the ice in our veins. My little sister's sobs had quieted, but her eyes were red, her hands still trembling as she clung to me. Rose sat across from us, her face pale, her usual confidence shattered. My brother leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his silence louder than any words. Our family hovered their questions, a relentless tide, but I couldn't focus on their voices. My mind was still out there in the dark with him. Grandpa listened as we recounted the night, his face growing darker with every word. "You're safe now," he said, but his eyes flicked to the windows as if expecting the man to appear. Rose's cousin explained what he'd seen. The man's screams, the branch torn from the tree, the way he'd stared at us, unblinking, like a predator, denied its prey. He was on something. Rose's cousin said, his voice uncertain. Had to be, but I wasn't so sure. The way he moved, the way his eyes burned, there was something deeper, something wrong, something that didn't belong in this world. My little sister's voice broke the silence, small and trembling. What was in his bag? She asked, her words a mirror to my own thoughts. The question hung in the air, unanswered, a weight that pressed against us all. I saw it in my mind, the bag heavy, swinging from his shoulder, its contents hidden, but ominous. A knife, a rope, something worse. The possibilities clawed at me, each one more terrifying than the last. I pulled my sister closer, my arms a shield against the unknown. But the fear was inside me now, a living thing that refused to be silenced. Rose's mom tried to reassure us, her voice soft but strained. "He's gone," she said. "You're safe here." But the restaurant, with its warm lights and familiar smells, felt like a cage, its walls too thin to keep out the night. My older sister, usually so quick to laugh, was quiet, her eyes fixed on the floor. My brother's anger simmered, his fists still clenched, as if ready to fight a ghost. We were together, surrounded by family, but we'd never felt more alone, more exposed. The rest of the trip was a blur. We stayed close to the restaurant, our eyes always scanning the streets, the park, the shadows. Every stranger was a threat, every sound a warning. I kept my little sister near her hand in mine, her fear a mirror to my own. We didn't talk about the man, not really, but he was there in the silences, in the glances we exchanged, in the way we flinched at sudden noises. The mountains watched their peaks, a constant reminder of the night we'd run, the night we'd escaped barely. Looking back, I can still see him, his twisted grin, his void-like eyes, the bag that held secrets I never want to know. I can still feel the weight of his gaze, the way it stripped away our safety, our innocence. San Pedro was beautiful, but it was also a place of shadows, of things that watched and waited. We were lucky, they said, that nothing worse happened. But luck feels like a lie when fear lingers, when the memory of a man, not quite a man, follows you home. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I know this. He wasn't just a stranger. There was something else in him, something dark, something that didn't belong. And as I sit here, years later, I can still hear my sister's scream, still see the bag swinging in the dark. My name is Theodore, and this is the story of the moment my childhood innocence began to crack, splintering under the weight of something I still can't explain. My brother and I had been shipped off to our grandparents' house for the holidays, a tradition that felt more like an exile than a vacation. The village was small, so small it barely registered as a dot on a map, a cluster of stone houses with red-tiled roofs surrounded by olive groves that stretched into the darkness. The nearest town, Varda, was an hour and a half away, a place where strangers might linger, but not here. Here everyone knew everyone, every face, every voice, every secret. Or so I thought. We usually slept in the living room, sprawled across a double bed that faced the front door, its worn wooden frame creaking under our restless tossing. But that summer, everything was different. My grandmother had broken her back, a quiet tragedy that reshuffled the house like a deck of cards. She needed the double bed, so my brother and I were banished to the guest room, a cramped space with 2 single beds pressed against opposite walls. Mine was right next to the window, a thin pane of glass separating me from the road. Outside, a road that was always empty after dusk. The blinds were flimsy, the kind that let slivers of moonlight slip through, casting jagged shadows across the floor. That first night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the air heavy with the scent of lavender from my grandmother's garden. The village was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that lulls you to sleep. It was a silence that made you strain to hear something, anything, to prove you weren't alone. My brother was already snoring his breath, a steady rhythm that should have grounded me. But it didn't. I felt exposed, like the window beside me was a portal to something I wasn't ready to face. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself into sleep, but my mind kept wandering to stories. My grandmother used to tell tales of spirits that wandered the hills of shadows that didn't belong to anyone. She'd laugh them off, call them old wives' tales, but the way her eyes lingered on the horizon made me wonder, what if those stories weren't just stories? I shook the thought away, pulling the blanket tighter around me, the coarse fabric scratching against my skin. The room felt smaller, the walls closer, the air heavier. I didn't know it then, but that was the last moment I'd feel safe in that house. As I drifted toward sleep, a sound jolted me awake, not loud, but sharp, deliberate, like a finger pressing against my eardrums. It wasn't a tap, not a knock, but a presence, a sensation that something was testing the boundary between me and the outside world. My eyes snapped open, heart thudding, and I turned toward the window. The blinds were closed, but the moonlight seeped through, outlining a shape that didn't belong. It wasn't a hand, not yet, but a distortion, a ripple in the darkness, as if the night itself was pressing against the glass, trying to get in. I lay there, frozen, my breath shallow, my body screaming to move, but my mind refusing. Don't look. Don't look. The thought looped in my head, an embedded command I couldn't ignore. The room seemed to pulse the air, thickening with every second I stared at the window. I wanted to wake my brother, to hear his voice, to anchor myself to something human, but my throat was dry, my voice trapped. The shape behind the blinds shifted, subtle but undeniable, and I knew that whatever was out there wasn't human, not entirely. The night stretched on endless, suffocating each second, dragging like a blade across my nerves. I lay there, eyes locked on the window, the shape behind the blinds, now a constant in my vision, a stain on the fabric of reality. My brother's snores were the only sound in the room, a cruel reminder that I was alone in my fear. The village outside was silent, no dogs barking, no wind rustling through the olive trees, just that oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow every other noise. But then it came again, that sound, not a tap, but a pressure, a deliberate intrusion, like something was testing the glass, probing for weakness. I pulled the blanket over my head, the fabric damp with my sweat, my breath hot against my face. Don't move. Don't look. The command looped again, a trance that held me captive. But the sound didn't stop. It grew not louder, but more insistent, a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. I imagined fingernails, long and jagged, dragging across the glass, leaving invisible marks that would glow in the moonlight if I dared to look. My mind flooded with images, sensory overload of twisted hands, eyeless faces, things that shouldn't exist but did lurking just beyond the thin barrier of the window. I thought of my cousin Mila, who lived in the apartment above my grandparents. She was older, reckless, always stumbling home late after nights of drinking in the summer heat. Maybe it was her, I told myself, clinging to the idea like a lifeline. Maybe she'd forgotten her keys again, and this was her way of getting my attention. The thought was flimsy, but it was enough to push me out of bed, my bare feet cold against the stone floor. I crept toward the living room, heart hammering each step, a battle against the instinct to run back and hide. The living room was dark, the double bed empty now that my grandmother was sleeping there. The front door loomed ahead, its brass handle glinting faintly in the moonlight. I reached for it, my hand trembling, and opened the door just enough to peer outside. The street was empty, the air still, the olive trees standing like silent sentinels. No Mila, no anyone. But as I turned to close the door, my eyes caught something that made my blood freeze. The guest room window, visible from the porch, wasn't smooth anymore. Long, jagged lines marred the glass. Not scratches, but marks, as if someone or something had clawed at it with desperate intent. They weren't random. They were deliberate. A message I couldn't read, but could feel in the pit of my stomach. I slammed the door shut, locking it with shaking hands, and ran back to the guest room, diving under the covers like a child hiding from a monster. The sound started again, almost immediately, that same relentless pressure, now accompanied by a faint hum, like a voice too low to understand. Don't open the blinds. Don't look. The command was stronger now, anchoring me to the bed, my body curled into a ball. I wanted to scream, to wake my brother, to run to my grandmother. But fear held me like a vice. I pictured Mila laughing at my fear, but the image twisted her face morphing into something else. Something with too many teeth, too many eyes. Something that knew my name. The night stretched on each moment, a battle between my need to know and my terror of what I might find. I thought of the stories my grandmother told, of spirits that haunted the hills, of things that lingered where they shouldn't. What if they were real? The question burrowed into my mind, a nested story within my own, each layer darker than the last. I stayed under the covers, my breath ragged, until exhaustion claimed me, pulling me into a dreamless sleep. Morning came, but it brought no relief. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting the room in soft golds, but the warmth felt hollow, like a mask hiding something sinister. I woke with a start, my body aching from tension, my eyes darting to the window. The blinds were still closed, but the marks I'd seen outside haunted my thoughts, vivid and sharp. I didn't want to look, didn't want to confirm what I already knew, but I couldn't stay still either. My brother was still asleep, oblivious to the night's terror. I envied him his ability to sleep through the unexplainable, to exist in a world where windows were just windows. I slipped out of bed, my feet hesitant on the cold floor, and approached the window. My hand hovered over the blinds, trembling the memory of those claw marks burning in my mind. Don't look, but I had to. I pulled the cord, the blind snapping up with a rattle, and sunlight flooded the room. The glass was clean. No marks, no scratches, no sign of the horror I'd seen. I stared confused, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Had I imagined it? The thought was tempting, but the weight in my chest told me otherwise. The marks had been real as the fear that still clung to me like damp clothes. I pressed my hand against the glass, expecting it to feel different, tainted, but it was just glass. Cold, smooth, ordinary. I turned to my brother, now stirring, and considered telling him. But what would I say? That I'd heard something, seen something, felt something that didn't make sense. He'd laugh, call me a baby, and I wasn't ready to face that. Instead, I went to the kitchen where my grandmother was already up, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, her eyes tired but kind. I wanted to tell her to spill everything, but the words caught in my throat. What if she didn't believe me? I asked about Mila instead, casual testing the waters. Is she home yet? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My grandmother frowned, her brow creasing. Mila's out of town for the week, she said, her tone matter of fact. She won't be back until Sunday. The words hit like a punch, my stomach twisting. If Mila wasn't here, then who or what had been outside the window, I didn't push further. I couldn't. The idea that it wasn't Mila, that it wasn't anyone I knew, was too much. The village was small, too small for strangers. There were no hotels, no hostels, no place for an outsider to stay overnight. Varda was too far, and no one wandered the hills at night, not in a place like this. Whoever was out there had to be local. Someone who knew. The village knew the house, knew me. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a sensory overload of dread that made the room spin. I pictured the claw marks again, not scratches, but intentions, a message carved into the night. I thought of the other kids in the village, a pair of siblings who were always causing trouble, always taunting me and my brother. Maybe it was them, I told myself, clinging to the idea like a lifeline. Maybe they'd snuck out, played a prank, tried to scare me. It was a weak hope, but it was all I had. I left the house, the morning sun, too bright, too cheerful for the weight in my chest. I walked down the street to the siblings' house, my steps quick, my heart pounding. The village was waking up old women, sweeping their porches, men smoking under olive trees. But it all felt wrong, like a stage set for a play I didn't understand. I rang the doorbell, waited my breath, shallow. No answer. I rang again, harder, desperate for something normal, something explainable. A neighbor leaned out her window, her face curious. "They're gone," she said. "Left 2 days ago, back to the capital." Her words were a blade cutting through the last shred of hope. If it wasn't Mila, wasn't the siblings, then who was it? The question looped in my mind, a trance. I couldn't escape, each repetition, darker, heavier, more suffocating. The day passed in a haze, the village's normalcy, a cruel contrast to the terror that had taken root in me. I went through the motions, eating breakfast, helping my grandmother with chores, playing with my brother in the yard. But my mind was elsewhere, trapped in the memory of that window, those marks that sound. The sun was high, the air thick with the scent of dust and wildflowers, but it couldn't reach the cold that had settled in my bones. I kept glancing at the guest room window, now just a rectangle of glass reflecting the blue sky. It looked harmless, ordinary, but I knew better. It's watching me. The thought came unbidden, irrational, but it felt true. I avoided the guest room, staying in the living room, or outside, anywhere but near that window. My brother noticed my silence, my jumpiness, but he didn't ask. Maybe he sensed it, the way fear can linger in the air like smoke. As evening fell, The village grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that made you feel like the only person left in the world. My grandmother cooked dinner, the clatter of pots and pans, a temporary anchor, but even her warmth couldn't shake the dread. I thought about telling her, spilling everything, the sound, the marks, the impossible absence of Mila or the siblings. But what could she do? She was old, fragile, her back still healing. I couldn't burden her with my fear. Night came too soon, the sky turning a deep, bruised purple. I didn't want to go back to the guest room, didn't want to face that window again, but I had no choice. My brother was already in bed, his back to me, his breathing slow and steady. I stood in the doorway, staring at the window, the blinds closed, but not enough to block the moonlight. It was there, waiting. I could feel it, a presence just beyond the glass, patient, relentless. I climbed into bed, pulling the blanket over my head, my heart racing. Don't look. Don't listen. The command was a lifeline, but it was fraying each moment, stretching it thinner. The room was silent, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it, the weight of something watching, waiting its attention. A physical thing pressing against me. I thought of my grandmother's stories again, of spirits that lingered in the hills, of things that wore human faces, but weren't human at all. The sound came again. Not a tap, but a pressure, a deliberate intrusion that made the air vibrate. It was closer now, not just at the window, but in the room. A presence that filled the space, crowding out the air. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath shallow, my body trembling. I pictured the marks on the glass, not scratches, but claims, a warning that whatever was out there wasn't done with me. I wanted to run, to scream, to wake my brother, but fear held me in place, a prisoner in my own body. I thought of the village, so small, so isolated, no place for strangers, no place for things like this. But what if it wasn't a stranger? What if it was something older, something tied to the land, to the hills, to the stories my grandmother told? The thought was a nested story. Each layer darker, each possibility more terrifying. I stayed under the covers, my breath hot and ragged, my mind looping through the same questions, the same fears. What's out there? Why me? The sound grew not louder, but more present, a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, a trance that pulled me deeper into terror. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, not until the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, banishing the sound, the presence, the fear for now. The second morning was no kinder than the first. The sunlight was bright, the village alive with the sounds of roosters and distant voices, but it all felt like a lie, a veneer over something darker. I was exhausted, my eyes heavy, my body aching from a night spent in a state of frozen terror. My brother was up oblivious as ever, talking about going to the river to swim. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped in the memory of that window, that sound, that presence. I didn't go near the window, didn't dare look at it, but I could feel it, its presence, a weight on my chest. I thought about leaving, begging my parents to come get us, but I knew they wouldn't understand. To them, this was just a village, just a summer, just a boy with an overactive imagination. But I knew better. I'd seen the marks, felt the presence, heard the sound that wasn't a sound. It was real, and it wasn't done with me. I went to my grandmother again, her face soft but tired, her hands busy with knitting. I wanted to tell her, to confess everything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I asked about the village, about the stories, about the things that lived in the hills. She smiled, her eyes distant, and told me the same tales, spirits, shadows, things that watched from the dark. But this time, she didn't laugh them off. She looked at me, really looked, and I wondered if she saw the fear in my eyes, the truth I couldn't say. I spent the day outside, avoiding the house, avoiding the window, but the fear followed me, a shadow I couldn't shake. The village felt different now, its narrow streets too tight, its houses too close, its silence too heavy. I kept thinking about the marks, about the absence of Mila, about the siblings who'd left days ago. There was no one left to blame, no one to explain what I'd seen, what I'd felt. That night, I refused to sleep. In the guest room, I dragged my blanket to the living room, curling up on the floor near my grandmother's bed. She didn't ask why, just patted my head and told me to sleep. But sleep didn't come. I lay there listening to the house, to the village, to the silence that wasn't silent. I waited for the sound, for the pressure, for the presence, but it didn't come. Not that night. We left the village. A few days later, the summer ending as abruptly as it had begun. I never told anyone what happened. Not my brother, not my parents, not even my grandmother. But the fear stayed with me, a weight I carried through the years, a question I could never answer. Who was outside the window? I'm older now, but the memory is as sharp as ever. The marks on the glass, the sound that wasn't a sound, the presence that knew my name. I never opened the blinds that night, and I'm glad I didn't. Because deep down, I know that whatever was out there wasn't human. It was something older, something tied to the village, to the hills, to the stories that weren't just stories. And sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I can still feel it, watching, waiting just beyond the glass.